One evening, I came home to a quiet house where my wife served dinner. She held her chopsticks with a calm, steady hand as I sat down, a strange feeling creeping over me. I could tell something was wrong. Her eyes, normally full of life, were clouded with sadness. I felt a tight knot form in my chest. I had been thinking about this moment for days, weeks even, but I didn't know how to start. The truth I was about to say seemed unbearable. But it had to be said. "I need to tell you something," I said softly, my voice trembling slightly. She didn't say anything at first, only nodded and continued to eat, as though trying to mask the hurt she could already sense. The silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. "I think we should get a divorce," I finally said. The words felt like a weight I couldn't lift off my chest. She looked at me, her face unreadable, and then asked in a quiet voice, "Why didn't you answer me when I asked?" Her words stung, and I saw a flicker of hurt in her eyes, a hurt that made me feel guilty. She threw her chopsticks down onto the table, her face flushed with emotion, and shouted, "You're not a man!" That night, we didn't speak to each other. She cried softly in her room, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow. I knew she deserved an explanation, but I couldn't give it to her. The truth, that I had fallen in love with someone else, was too painful to share. The following day, I drafted a divorce agreement. I felt bad, but I was determined to end things. I offered her our house, the car, and 30% of my company. She looked at the paper for a moment, her face a mask of emotion, before she tore it up into pieces. The woman I had spent 10 years of my life with now felt like a stranger to me. Still, I couldn't change my feelings for Jane. She cried loudly in front of me, and though the sound was heartbreaking, it also made me more sure of my decision. The next day, when I came home late, I found her sitting at the table, writing something. I was too tired to pay attention, my mind still consumed by thoughts of Jane. I went straight to bed. When I woke up in the morning, she was still writing. She handed me a piece of paper. It was her divorce conditions. She didn't want anything from me. All she asked for was 1 month, one last month together, before we went our separate ways. She wanted us to try to live normally for the sake of our son, who was about to take his exams. I agreed reluctantly, but then she had one more request. "I want you to carry me from our bedroom to the front door every morning, just like you did when we first moved in together on our wedding day," she said softly. At first, I thought this was a strange request, but I agreed, wanting to make our last days together as peaceful as possible. I told Jane about it, and she laughed, dismissing it as silly, but I still went along with it. The mornings felt awkward at first. Carrying her felt unnatural. Our son would watch with curiosity and excitement, clapping his hands and saying, "Daddy's carrying Mommy." It made me feel sad, remembering how far we had drifted apart. As the days went by, it became easier. I began to notice small details about her that I had long forgotten. The way her blouse smelled, how her hair had grayed over the years. I hadn't really looked at her for a long time. She wasn't as young as she used to be, but the woman I had married still held a quiet beauty. I began to feel a growing sense of sadness for what we had lost. One day, while she was trying on some old dresses, she said, "All of these are too big now." I noticed then how thin she had become, how much weight she had lost. She had been hiding so much pain, and I had been too wrapped up in my own selfish desires to notice. This realization hit me hard. As the month went on, I found myself dreading the last day. The simple act of carrying her from the bedroom to the front door had become a ritual, a reminder of the years we had spent together. Our son had grown accustomed to it, and though it felt strange, I knew I would miss it. The morning of the final day, I could barely carry her. She had grown weaker, and as I lifted her in my arms, I realized just how much time had passed, how many moments I had wasted. When I set her down outside the door, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Please don't tell him about the divorce." I nodded, my heart heavy with regret. As I drove to work, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had led to this point. I rushed to Jane, wanting to tell her that I had changed my mind. I didn't want the divorce anymore. But when I said those words, Jane looked at me in shock and asked if I had a fever. "No," I said firmly. "I've realized that our marriage wasn't bad. We just stopped paying attention to each other. I should have noticed sooner." Jane slapped me, her face full of anger and disbelief. "You can't just change your mind like this," she shouted, slamming the door behind her. I didn't care. I was sure of my decision now. I rushed to buy flowers for my wife. I wrote on the card, "I'll carry you every morning until death do us part." When I came home that evening, I was filled with a sense of joy and excitement, eager to make things right. But when I walked into our bedroom, I found my wife lying still in bed. She had passed away. She had been sick for months, but I had been too consumed with my own selfishness to notice. She had known that her time was running out and had chosen to shield our son from the pain of divorce. In his eyes, I was still the loving husband. As I stood there, grief crashing over me, I realized that the things that truly matter in a relationship are not the material things, the house, the car, the money. True happiness comes from the small, everyday moments, the love and care you show each other. A happy marriage is built on these little things, not grand gestures or promises. And now, it was too late.